The owners of my mansion permission are having an open weekend heritage event where people will be shown around the house on guided tours. They've also asked if I would be willing to do a presentation of the metal detecting finds, and I've jumped at the chance, of course. I've already started mounting some of the finds on boards, as you can see, and using one of these boards I'm going to do a session about buttons, some very interesting buttons. I'm going to do a little bit about the history of buttons, a little bit of identification of buttons, aging of buttons, and I will also feature a few of the buttons that I found at the mansion. They have some quite good stories behind them. So if that's the sort of thing you think you'd be interested in, then hang around and we'll find out. They've been around for about 5,000 years. The very early ones were made from shell. The Romans had buttons. You might find some Roman ones. There's a couple coming on screen now. These are made of lead. I've found one, and here's a picture of the one that I found. And you could be forgiven for just thinking that it was a piece of lead, but this is a deformed Roman button. Don't forget the Romans also gave us the forerunner to the safety pin, which was the fibula. A very common find for us are the 4-hole pressed copper and pressed steel trouser, fly, shirt, overall buttons. There are literally millions upon millions of these in the ground. A lot of these have the maker's stamps on them, maker's marks, and these generally date from about 1850 onwards. 1850 is very early for one of these, but they were around. Buttons through the medieval period right through to the Tudors, they were quite crude. They were functional, but they were rough cast. They weren't too clever at all. Then through the 1600s, the materials got better, the casting abilities became better, they had a little bit of design on them, they were a bit more decorative as well. This continued into the 1700s, and from the 1700s on is the period where we find most of our buttons. And here's a little chart, which is just a basic chart really, but it will give you some idea on how to date buttons from their shanks really. You can see that the early 1700s buttons were all cast in one piece and a hole was drilled through the shank. We find a lot of tomback buttons in the ground, and the tomback refers to the metal itself. It's a copper alloy, it's got tin and zinc and all sorts of things in it, but it's quite a hard material that keeps its shininess. It is, however, a very brittle material. Tomback buttons come in all sorts of sizes, from little cuff-sized buttons right through to the big dandies. Although the tomback button was still produced well into the 1800s, the gold gilt button overtook them very rapidly. In the late 1700s, the art of gilding buttons was perfected really. They used to use 5 grains of pure gold in a mixture of mercury to cover 144, which is a gross 144 buttons. This would have been painted onto the buttons by hand, and the buttons were then put in an oven and they were baked. When I say they put them in an oven, I really mean a furnace, because you need quite a high temperature for this to work. Competition between these button manufacturers was fierce, and they came up with all sorts of ideas to make people think theirs was the best gilding. They were called double gilt, treble gilt, orange gilt, colour gilt, extra fine gilt. All it meant really was that some of them gilded their buttons more than once. Now this is a button that I dug up at the mansion. It's a button that would have belonged to a captain or a commander in the Royal Navy. It has a specific date range of 1795 to 1812, and on the back it's extra fine gilt. The manufacturer of this button was Hammond, Turner and Dickinson's of London. As it was issued to captains or commanders only, this is quite a rare find. As you can see from this picture, it was a fantastic looking button. Look at the gold colour of it. It compares very favourably with this 1950s Royal Navy button, although the design is almost the same still after all those years. It's quite possible that the owner of this next button actually met the captain or commander that owned the last one. This is a Napoleonic officer button, and it dates from 1810 to 1814 specifically. In all probability, the gentleman that owned this button would have been a prisoner of war. There were over 100,000 French prisoners of war from the Napoleonic era that were housed in this country. Any captured French officers became the Admiralty Transport Board responsibility, and once they'd signed a parole document, they were given a copy of that, and they had to carry that around with them, and it served as an identity card because they weren't locked up. Some of the officers didn't want to go out on parole, and they stayed with their men, and some of them even died in captivity, like this fella. Conditions for imprisoned men were very harsh indeed. Some of them were housed in prison ships, which were rotting hulks, just sat in the bays around the country. There was actually a prison that was specially built just to house Napoleonic prisoners. To buy extra food, the prisoners they made models and toys, boxes, all from straw and the bones that they had left over from their meagre rations. Some of these items are very highly sought after these days and command quite good prices at auction. Being naval men, they had a tradition of carving scrimshaw, and consequently a lot of these models are very, very good indeed. Now we'll move on to livery buttons. Livery buttons have intriguing designs, some of them. They're rooted in the histories of the noble families of Great Britain. And there's all sorts of different themes: animals, birds, coronets, crests, shields, initials, mottos, all sorts. Lots of these livery buttons have a coronet on. It's not a crown. Only a king or queen can have a crown on a button. These are coronets, and these are the usual coronets that you'll see. They help with the identification of the owner. We're going to take a look now at a livery button that I found up at the mansion, and we're going to decipher it. This is the one. You can see that it has a coronet at the top. It has a lozenge diamond shape, and it has some initials inside. Starting with the coronet, we can see that it has 4 pearls across the middle there. That denotes a baron or a baroness, so there's a starting point. In heraldic terms, the diamond or lozenge indicates that this livery belongs to a woman. This woman could be the wife of a baron, it could be the daughter of a baron, or it could be a baroness herself. Sometimes the initials on these buttons are hard to fathom out, but the way I like to do it is that I have a look and see if I can see just one letter, and then I try to trace that letter, and I do it in a colour. I will then look to see what's left, and I'll change colour and see if I can trace parts of another letter, and at the end you've usually found out what it says. Using this information, I've traced the owner of this livery, and it was Baroness Lady Mary Jeune. She was Baroness St Helier. She was born in 1845. She lived until 1931. She was a London County Councillor for many, many years, and she actually introduced the very first free school meals in the slum areas of London in the 1890s. Now here's another button coming up. Can you work out the rank of the person that owned this button using this picture of the coronets? Here's another button I found up at the mansion with an Earl's coronet on it, and it has the initials CJR. I haven't actually researched this one yet, so I can't actually tell you who it is. I'm going to leave a few links at the top of the page in the description there for various aspects of buttoneering, shall we call it. If you're interested, I do believe there's a museum in Ross-on-Wye or Hay-on-Wye, I'm not sure which, but you could always become a member of the British Button Society. They will actually do IDs on buttons for you. If you're a member, it's free of charge, and if you're not, I think it's about £5 a button. So to me, that it seems worthwhile. It would be worthwhile joining that. There is a very good book that's got, I think it's about 3,000 different designs of livery button in it, with pictures, but it's quite an expensive book. It's called The Livery Buttons, The Pit Collection. I've actually got a copy of this in my local library, so whenever I need to use it, I'll just pop down there, because it's a reference book, so you can't take it out, but you can go in and have a look. Well worth it. Anyway, that's just about it really. So if you've enjoyed this, please give the video a like if you would. It would be much appreciated. Thank you very much, and see you next time.